And then go on. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been hibernating like everybody else.
Yeah, exactly.
I see eating that. Oh.
All right, should we get started?
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we're getting to a good number of people. Let's see here. Oh,
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to mute everyone and I'll ask the folks introducing to unmute yourself, please.
Oh.
okay.
Thanks.
Oh, I guess I was muted as well. I was saying that everyone will have their turn to get unmuted when you have questions. So, but you know, as always, it's lovely to see everyone's faces. Thank you for being here tonight. And so, before we begin, let's get started with the blessing for the meeting. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotov v'tzivanu la'asok b'tzorhei hatzibor. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler, source of all, who has made us holy with your mitzvot and instructed us to engage deeply with our community. All right, well, so welcome to Beth Am's 5th summertime chat. Pretty unbelievable. And while the school year has started for many of us, we're still clinging on to the summer for some of us. We're also obviously thinking about those who impacted by the fires. If you know you know of others who need help, you know, please visit bethon.org and give to the special August and September Tzedakah box, which is the JFCS Wildfire Emergency Fund. And you can also either give or request help from our Social Action Emergency Relief Fund, as you guys know. So just really quickly, so for those who've been on Summertime Chats a bunch of times, you know that we started these chats because we no longer have those, you know, serendipitous moments when we run into each other rushing on campus, which seems so long ago. But we wanted to create opportunities to enter in dialogue with all of you. And tonight, of course, we're here to talk about some priorities that we're looking to focus on over the next year. So you know, in the past, there's a couple of ground rules to think about. So first of all, we're recording tonight's session for anyone who can't make it. Please stay on mute, but you're welcome to put anything in chat. But if you do have a question, use the webinar controls that's on the bottom of the screen and then click on the participants and then raise that hand, that electronic hand, and you'll be called on, and also then unmute yourself and ask your question. So, all right, so let's just dive into it. So tonight's topic is about this upcoming year's strategic priorities for Beth Am. And Rabbi Morrison and I, we emailed this to the congregation this past Friday, and but we wanted to just start out by providing some context around, you know, how we got to this point, you know, share the priorities again, and then we just want to open up the floor for questions and comments. So we just want to make sure we maximize that time for everyone. So, you know, I was thinking a little bit about, like, you know, how we got here. And, you know, it's interesting because, like, during the last 6 years on the board and, the 15, 20 years as a member, you know, I actually can't think of a specific time when we publicly stated our strategic priorities to the congregation in this way. You know, I could be wrong, but I hope, you know, you can appreciate our attempt to be as transparent as possible. So that's the first piece. I started having these conversations with Rabbi Morrison soon after we ratified his appointment, and of course there's always a lot of priorities for Beth Am, and we'll continue to have many this year. But we also knew that in order to make the most progress in certain areas, we would also really need to be focused, you know, on a few. And so we decided to look at, 3 different areas, right? And when we were looking at these priorities, we also wanted to make sure, moving forward, not just this year, but in the future, as we have more priorities every year, is to make sure that there's full collaboration between the professional team and also the board, because as you know, like Beth Am is really built on this great sacred partnership between lay leaders and also our professional staff. And we also wanted to make sure that, when we accomplish these goals, we wanted to make sure that they're felt across the entire institution as well. The other piece about these priorities is, as you will remember, during the senior rabbi transition and search process, we conducted these ICART sessions, right? And so we asked for input from the congregation, all of you, around, Beth Am's future, vision for the future. And there are 5 areas that congregants articulated to the transition team for the future of Beth Am. 1 was diverse and welcoming. 2 was new models of membership that engage the next generation. 3 was multi-generational and connected to each other. 4 was lifelong engagement, and 5 was community of learners, right? And so that was the input that we got from all of you as a congregation, those 5 things. And so when we look, when we went through the search process, we made sure we communicate these things to all of our candidates, including Rabbi Morrison, in terms of what we're thinking about for ourselves as a congregation. And then of course, COVID-19 happened, right? And so that, in a lot of ways, that accelerated, us to be able to stay connected with each other using technology. And of course, we had other things happen, after George Floyd's killing, the message around racial equity became even more clear, more coordinated, and more thorough than ever before. And so during the last board meeting, the board and the program team, we approved these priorities. We also held a 2-day retreat last week, and we began thinking more deeply about these priorities. And then also these priorities are being led in partnership by a program team member and also lay leaders as well. And so we can talk a little bit about that. So that's how we got here. And at this point, I'll pass it along to Rabbi Morrison, who will talk specifically about the priorities in case you didn't see the email, and then we'll just open up the floor for questions. So, Rabbi Morrison.
Great, thank you, Andy. When you spoke just now about this hasn't been a process or a way that this congregation has sort of moved forward, or you can't remember when that's happened before, where we've sort of shared publicly our priorities. I was just thinking, well, actually, the course of my rabbinic career, I've never been in a situation where we have shared our strategic priorities with the congregation, certainly in this way. So I'm thrilled that we're doing this. I'm also thrilled to see so many folks. When I did my first summertime chat on like July something or other, I barely knew a soul. And so it's great now to see so many faces that I recognize, and thank you for spending time with us this evening. I'm just going to share my screen with folks so that they can see I'm just going to show you 3 quick slides, which are basically taken from the email that we sent you. And let me just do that for a second. All right. And great. So I'm hoping folks can see that. If you can't see the right side of the screen or the right side of these slides, you might just want to close your pictures, the frames on your screen through Zoom. And I think the first thing I want to note about these priorities is that though we've given them numbers 1, 2, and 3, no one of these priorities is of greater priority than the other. So I'm going to run through them in the way that we presented them in our email. But number 3 is as important to us as number 1 and 2 and so forth. So the first priority that we're planning to focus on this year is called our Sanctuary for Imperfect Practice, Racial Equity and Justice. And as you can read, we very much wanted to leverage this moment in American societal life and to ensure that what is happening, our pursuit of justice outside of our congregation is actually matched by our pursuit of justice inside our congregation, and that equity is occurring within our congregation. And so for me, this priority is very much about ensuring that our congregation is reflective of the diversity of the Bay Area, and 2, that our congregants of color feel more than just welcomed in our congregation, but actually involved in it and become owners of it, and that they own the future of this place just as much as anyone else. And so this is for me the principal reason to do this work in this year. We also want to note, Andy and I both want to note that we are speaking about these as priorities for 1 year, and we have articulated goals for each of these priorities for 1 year. We recognize that a lot of our work in each of these areas is a multi-year effort, but we felt it best to be very concrete about where we're going in this first year around each of these priorities. So let me speak about the second one. So this priority very much a focus, as you can see, on youth education is, to my mind, a result of this notion that we need to focus in this area really rose to the top, particularly in my conversations in the search process and in the months before I began. And so we're very much focusing this year on, this is of course going to be a multi-year effort, but in this year we're focusing particularly on 6th through 12th grades as the sort of the entry point into this priority. The education department has reworked itself so that now we have a full-time teen educator on staff, and the clergy is prioritizing its work with this age cohort in our congregation but the clergy is becoming the central faculty for 8th through 12th graders in this coming year. And also we're going to begin to teach Torah weekly to 6th and 7th graders and their parents in different ways in the coming year. And so I'm sharing this because these are two of the ways we've already dug into this priority in our planning. We've also formed new committees, one to support elementary education and another to support teen education, because we want to ensure that we're working in collaboration with the very folks and families, the parents and the children with whom on whom we're focusing this effort in this coming year. And the third one, so this has become, I would say, the last 6 months, for all of its trials and difficulties, has also become a period of incredible creativity. And the pandemic has forced us to work in new ways, but we see in the ways that we are now working a lot of new opportunities to create engagement and connection among our members, as well as opportunities to engage new people into our community. And so we want to use this year to really learn from the past 6 months already. I can't believe it's been about 6 months that we've been in this pandemic. We want to learn from that. And we're also going to be engaging in a lot of experimentation in terms of how do we build out continue to build out what I call here these sort of virtual facets of this community. And we imagine that when we are able to come back together, we will proceed together in a kind of hybrid format that we can't wait till we'll be able to be back together in person, but we also see the need to continue to build these new ways of gathering and coming together that this summertime chat is an example of. So those are the 3 priorities. In our email we wrote about some of our goals in this coming year, and let me stop sharing my screen. And Andy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that at this point.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you for sharing those things.
So now we want to move to you. We want to hear from you, your questions and comments about these priorities. We're going to, let's see, you'll need to, you can raise a digital hand, and you can also put questions into the chat. Rachel Tash is with us to help with this, but our desire now is to simply engage in conversation with you.
So I see Jeff Berman had his hand raised. Jeff, if you would like to unmute yourself, you could ask your question.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
As a practical matter, in your first goal, how many Latinx or Black Americans really are Jewish? And I don't know how you go recruit. I remember down in Salinas, my practice was heavily Latinx, and they're all Catholics. I can't remember anybody saying they're Jewish. And we didn't have a lot of experience with the Black community. They were mostly went on the coast, but my understanding is there weren't many Jews in that group either. So I'd like to know how you're going to recruit more of you said reflect the Bay Area. Obviously, South Asians and the Muslim community aren't going to be interested, but I'd like to know practically how you're going to recruit people who really aren't there.
Andy, do you want to respond by speaking a little bit about the demographics of the Bay Area?
Yeah, sure, definitely. It's a really important question, I think. I think it's hard to know exactly, obviously, because you have to be able to collect this information, and I think the main piece is, and the reason why I'm speaking is not just because I'm Chinese, right? Also, I've actually been involved in, I sit on the URJ's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force that was formed actually last year. And this was actually kicked off by Daryl Messinger. So she really wanted to make sure that she left her post as the president of URJ and informed this task force. But I also sit on an advisory board for V'Holashon, which is an organization that advocates on behalf of Jewish people, the diversity of Jewish people. And they've been around for about 20 years. So they've been doing this work for a really long time. And I think the main message I've learned from doing a lot of work is that Jews are multicultural, right? Like we've lived around the world for millennia. And I think a lot of Americans think of Jews as white because the majority of immigration to America was from Eastern Europe. But, there's, as we know, Jews are from, African American, Latino, Asian, Sephardic, Mizrahi. And so some of the work that they did, the V'Holashon did about 20 years ago was they already had, they did a whole research, on the demographics, and it was about 20% of America's 6 million Jews. So this was a while ago. And, it's, I would say it was anywhere between 10 to 20%, which marks you at about a 1.22 million, in terms of a number. But I think what's more important too is that, even if we don't know the exact number, I think part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a community where, it's kind of like the example I've used is who's seen the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner? Who remembers that? Yeah, exactly. And what was the voice that kept on whispering at people, at Kevin Costner that entire movie for like half of the movie?
If you build it, they will come.
Yes, exactly. So, it's, and I think that's a really important lesson here because let me just give you a quick example. So my son actually, who's mixed, right? So he's half Asian and, those who know my wife, Abby, she's not. And so he actually doesn't look Asian at all, but like he attended a camp for Jews of color this summer. And for that week, there were actually about 20 kids signed up on Zoom that week. And I would say visibly, most of them, almost all of them were a different race or ethnicity, and they were Jewish, right? And ironically, Noah actually looked the most white out of all the kids, if you guys seen Noah before. So that tells me that there is a market out there, right? Like they focus on having a camp for kids who are Jews of color, and those kids have a place that they go. Another example is how many of you know Bend the Arc, as an organization? They do some really great work. Yeah. So Stosh Kotler, who's the CEO, shared that over the last 6 years, since they started focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, their organization has increased Jews of color on its board and staff from 0% to 25% and 20% respectively in terms of their board and also their staff, which is pretty incredible. It's been a lot of hard work, and she feels like sometimes they're still on day one. So I just wanted to, kind of give you an example of some of those thoughts out there. But, Jeff, I mean, could definitely have a lot more conversations around that.
I also wanted just to add to this within the context of the history of the reform movement, and that in some ways, I think what's happening in our society at large is about like the next stage of a fight for civil rights in this country. Something that's been in the history of the reform movement, there have been periods along the way where our movement has made efforts to keep opening the doors and opening them wider. I think specifically about opening the doors to interfaith families, and that began, before my rabbinate began, long before it. But that was a concerted effort to open the doors to folks. A next stage was about opening the doors to GLBTQ folks, and that's been an important part of building our community and building our future. And so for me, this stands in that line of ensuring our openness and ensuring that everyone has a hand in our future. And also, I think it's important to note the way in which folks identify themselves and is not necessarily determined specifically by the way in which we see the color of their skin or what we perceive as their cultural background. And so this is an effort to ensure that all who want to come in will or can.
I think Greg Marcus has his hand up. Greg, would you like to ask the next question?
Yes, thank you. It's also on this subject, and I really am excited that this is like one of the strategic priorities. I think it's so wonderful, important. A couple of comments. There was a Bay Area Jewish demographic study that was 2 or 3 years ago, which showed that 25% of Jewish families in the Bay Area had a person of color in them. And so this is actually, so the question is, well, why don't we see them? And one of the things that came out is that when people would come, they would feel welcome, but they didn't necessarily feel like they belonged because they didn't see other people who looked like them. So, if you look at our website, we don't have a lot of pictures of people, but it's not necessarily, oh, I'm seeing, I'm checking out Beth I'm seeing people of color on the website. I haven't done a, in-depth look. But there's also, there's a great series about Jews of color on Judaism Unbound. I shared a link for that. But there's also, sometimes a person of color will show up at a synagogue and be like, oh, when did you convert? And it's like, well, my great-grandparents were Black and Jewish. So there are just certain questions which, can make someone feel unwelcome. And so they may not come back again. And I think that's part of the exercise is understanding that we may inadvertently be doing things which make us a less welcoming or belonging place.
Thank you.
David Gaskill, would you like to ask a question or make a comment? Please unmute yourself.
I was thinking a little on a different tack, and in terms of the youth education. I'm just wondering what's the thinking about the kids that are in that transitional state, the 12 and 13-year-olds. Is there something that is being developed aimed specifically at them?
Yeah. So I want to note also something that Andy and I put in the email letter we put out, that each of these priorities is connected to the issue of engagement, and in some ways I could speak of it in terms of membership growth. One of the reasons why we're focusing to begin with at exactly, David, at that age group and older, is because that's a key moment, both of opportunities for greater connection, and in many cases it leads to a door out of our community as well. And so what we're trying to do is strengthen a sense of cohort. I think it's going to be very important that the clergy are teaching in that space, so to speak. And we're going to be looking at the experience of B'nai Mitzvah over time. I should say, over time, we're going to look at the experience of B'nai Mitzvah and what changes we might want to make in that going forward. And also, I know there are a number of folks on this call who are engaged with Torah study in our community. One of my goals is to use that opportunity and to have the clergy teach there so that we are really working with kids and families on sophisticated ways of reading Torah. They're the exact same ways that we're teaching Torah to adults. We want to start imbuing our kids with those ways of thinking about our texts. And so I think that's another educational component of this. It's like, how can we create critical readers of Torah? And in order to do that, we have to begin that process in sixth grade, rather than, I think a lot of people are starting to critically read Torah only, I'm not talking about this congregation, but generally many folks don't start reading Torah critically until they're adults. So we're trying to change I'm not borrowing Bend the Arc, but I want to change the arc of how folks are engaging in reading at an earlier point. So David, I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Ariella, are you there? Would you like to unmute?
Thank you, Rachel, for the opportunity. I would just like to talk about that. I was privileged to participate in a program for 7th graders in Beth Am. It was a one-time opportunity. It was a one-time opportunity where people of my age group, which is the elders, came. Yeah, they all were. And Marie Avery, I want to say, she participated too. We came together to have a conversation with the 7th graders. And each one of us was asked to share something that we thought would be interesting to them, whatever. And it turned out really wonderful. The adults who came each brought different things that they wanted to share. And beforehand, I gathered the adults together, and we each took a couple of minutes to be listened to. Like, one of them said, "Oh my God, teenagers, I don't even know what to do with teenagers." And so I said, let's have a group. Let's just each one get 2 minutes to talk about that. And so we each did that. And then we broke up into tables. And I can only report on my table where I was going to share with them. They asked me to share the experience about things that I learned from my mother, who was a Holocaust survivor, something like that. And I chose to first listen to them. Before they listened to me, each of them got a couple of minutes to talk about, what is just where they're at, whatever it was. And then I told my story in the perspective of lessons that I learned from my mom's story. Great. And then at the end, when we went around the table, they were actually beaming by the end of it. And then I asked them something that you take away from you here. But in particular, it was more about me listening to them. I didn't want to make it too much my story. But as a result, there was one child who didn't speak all the time. And anyhow, I said to her, I know you have really good things to say, and I just want to make sure you get an opportunity. And out she came and talked about that she has a sibling who is, I'll say, disabled, that is born with disability, and how just about inclusion of that. And I said, I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's really important for us to be able to include everybody. And that's a really important point to just, anyhow, that's what it was.
Great,
and afterwards, I got these wonderful thank you cards, which I've kept till today, about what they got out, from that. So the thing I just want to say here is we have an untapped, amazing resource in Beth Am of elders who are not participating now in work things always. And, to be able to share, to be able to interact intergenerational. and especially around racism and racial inequities. So thank you for letting me. Sorry, it was a bit long.
Thank you. Thanks. It's helpful.
Steve Ina, you guys want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, sure. We're unmuted.
Hi.
A couple of things. One is the great priorities, wonderful. Yeah, anything we can do to help support it. I 100% echo what Oriella said. I think we have a great number of people in the congregation who can help with these goals. Excuse me. As she just said, in Torah, we used to have graduates, if you will, of the board teach Torah to 6th and 7th graders. And that was a wonderful thing to do because it kept the graduates of the board busy. And it brought some different kind of perspective to things. So I love that whole idea. Going back to priority 1, though, I wanted to say a couple of things I think really need saying. First of all, it's the tradition of Beth Am to do precisely what we're doing here. And it's so important to who we are. We are, after all, Beth Am, the house of the people. And if we look back just 25 years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have women on the pulpit, on the bima. We didn't have that. And when we talked about it at some of the meetings, we got some pushback about, well, we want to hear baritone voices, we want to hear this, we want to hear that. And now we can't even imagine what our congregation would be like without women being, more than 50% of who we are. That's number one. Number two, LGBTQ. I'm sorry, I always trip over that. We had a long time ago, 20 years ago, whatever, people come to us and said, we need to respect our kids who don't feel comfortable here because they are, because they're LGBTQ. And so we said, well, the pushback we got initially was there aren't that many people here that affects. So why should we be spending all these resources on them? And all of a sudden now we see why, because we have a richer congregation and many more people involved. When we look at the World Union for Progressive Judaism, we don't see white Ashkenazi Jews all over the world. We really don't. And so this is us, pardon me for using that tagline. And when we do this, we will get benefits that we can't even imagine today. We're not creative enough. Maybe some of you are. I'm an old fart. But some of us may be creative enough. I'm not creative enough to imagine what we could be in 10 years with this effort.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, a new hand. Fred Half. Fred and Sherry, you guys want to unmute, please?
Actually, it's Sherry.
Oh, hi, Sherry.
Many years ago, when I was sisterhood president, I started a program called Adopt a Grandparent. And I'm looking at our congregation. We're all in silos in terms of the age group that we're all interested in. We're with our own little groups of friends, and they're the same age, most notably. It would be interesting if we could have something like Adopt a Grandparent, where you would have an older couple that doesn't have grandchildren locally to match with a couple that has young children, and the mentoring and the sharing of stories to follow up with Ariella has said. That idea might work as a way of an intergenerational kind of program that would create a bond within our community that would be stronger.
Great. Thank you.
So a lot of great questions. Keep them coming. Jeff Wolfeld.
I just wanted to make a note that there's been a lot of discussion now about different kinds of cross-generational and sort of direct connections or small group connections. I think that's really important, and in fact, I think that's absolutely vital in the environment that we have right now. I think small groups on Zoom make sense. Large groups on Zoom do not. And in order to have small groups, you need to have a lot of them, which means you need to have a lot of people volunteering to be leading those groups or participating in some sort of a moderation capacity. So it's going to fall on all of us to help out here.
It's great. Jeff, I don't think we've met, so I don't know if you're able to turn on your camera or not. I think what you've stated, it falls into this place of finding new ways to gather, particularly at this time. And nice to see you. And I think what we are discovering is the power. Zoom has a particular power when it comes to being in this, 12 of us on a page or a picture. And so I think we're starting to figure out how to build that. We're at the beginning of it. But I think it lends itself in particular to the casual encounter that even right now, I mean, we're seeing into homes and we're seeing each other. And it's also, frankly, particularly for newcomers, I'll use the word, it's safer. You can mute yourself. You can turn off your camera. It's an easier way to engage. There's a say for the technological piece. There's a nice threshold in order. It's a low threshold to come into. So thank you for raising that.
I've seen some nice comments in the chat also, and I note that our Director of Learning and Educational Innovation, Sarah Lowing, is on this call too, which is wonderful. And she was talking about how connecting the young people, doing some of this intergenerational stuff is really on her mind with the teens. But what we haven't talked about yet is Sarah has also done a lot of innovating for 6th grade and under, recreating some family-based programs. And I think that addresses, or it speaks to the other comment that Janet Podell made about, it's not just when there's an intermarried family, it's not just the kids that we're concerned about, it's the adults as well. And Sarah is really, I think, putting together a nice plan for approaching the whole family and not just focusing on the students, the little ones, but thinking of this as an opportunity to help educate and empower the whole family to be doing Jewish stuff at home. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to pop in and say anything. You're certainly welcome to, but I just wanted to pass that on from the chat. And then also, Greg Marcus wanted to ask another question, make another comment. Greg?
Yeah, so once again, thank you. I don't mean to hog up all the airtime, but I'm curious where the orchard fits in. I don't see like a specific priority for like young adults, but I'm wondering, was there like a similar sort of, are there similar chat sessions with them to try to kind of bring them along and keep them in the loop?
So Andy, I'm just going to jump in on that one if that's all right. I think it's really important to note that in describing these 3 priorities, that doesn't mean that's all we're doing this year. That it's to say that we in order for us to be productive as a cohort of leaders, we wanted to really focus our energies together in particular places. So Greg, the orchard, I think my expectation is the efforts of the orchard are about to kick into maybe even a higher gear than this past year, because it's year 2. And we didn't mention this in our introduction, but or with any specificity. Each of us, there's a professional attached to each of these priorities. Rabbi Sarah is the professional attached to priority number 1. Sarah Lowing is our professional, connected to 2, and Rabbi Heath is overseeing 3. Rabbi John, I'm getting used to calling I've tried John. I want to just call him John. John is going to do some of the justice work around priority 1, but also with intentionality. We didn't want him to be the key professional with any one of these priorities, so that he could focus on the orchard. And definitely there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, sort of cross-pollination about these ideas in all. Effectively, our goal is to ensure that these ideas are sort of throughout the entire, are being thread into the entire congregation, woven into the entire congregation and all of its activities.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing too that's just been so wonderful to see, because there's just been, so many interesting ideas, programs, innovations that's come out of the Orchard even in the last year. And there's so many things that we can actually learn from the Orchard as a congregation in terms of what's worked for some of their programs and engagement as well. Not to get into specifics, but I've seen a couple of examples so far, and we have two board members, Michaela Hellman-Tincher and also Taylor Epstein, who are very involved in the Orchard from that standpoint as well.
Are there other questions?
Jeff Wolfeld.
Well, okay, I'm going to jump in here and ask something I've been thinking, but was unsure how to ask. And
Take this off.
I'm still not sure how to ask it, but I guess my question is, how do we infuse these priorities with spirituality and religious practice, or the other way around? How do we prioritize spirituality and religious practice with respect to these priorities?
Jeff, I really appreciate you starting by saying, I'm not sure how to ask this question, because here's a response, but I'm not sure it will be a response to the question you're trying to ask. I would assert that what we're describing is completely, one is not separate from the other. So that effectively, each of these priorities is centered around our values and our mission. And so in my estimation, this I'll use the word work, is effectively trying to fulfill our religious, our spirituality, and I would say it's actually a fulfillment of commandments and our side of the covenant. So that's my response to that. But I recognize I might not be answering the question you're trying to ask.
I guess I expected to hear something among the three priorities about spiritual practice.
So I'm going to again. so I would for all of these pieces, to me, just as an example, I think a lot of priority one has to do with welcoming the stranger and learning from our past. And so those to me are spiritual priorities or spiritual practices. I think number two has a lot to do with the study and practice of Torah. So I think that's to think if we're involved in education, education itself in this congregation is a spiritual practice. And the third is about, I could slight, one of the reasons why I'm very pleased with these priorities is they they intermingle and they all intersect with each other. I could speak about number three, about being the creation and the proliferation of a caring community, ultimately, in which we are all engaged with caring for one another. And by that, I mean ensuring that each of us is not only stays well and healthy, but also each of us is pursuing becoming the best self we can be. And so to me, it's all intermingled. But Jeff, or this goes for everyone. I'm very eager to keep, I want to think more about your question, but I hope I'm thinking about the right question you're asking, or the question you're trying to ask. And of course, we could keep talking about this separately too.
And I also just want to add one more thing, if that's okay. I really appreciate that question too, Jeff, because if you think about it, we started this meeting where we did the blessing for the meeting, because in everything that we do, we're a unique organization in that sense that we really want to ground ourselves in the sacred, right? I mean, that's otherwise like what makes us different as an institution, right? And so I'm speaking about one just because I've done a lot of work with Rabbi Sarah on this piece of it, more so than the other two. But in thinking about that priority, we have to be able to ground this in the sacred, and so in a lot of the narrative that we were thinking about this, in the Torah, the Jews are taught to accept others without prejudice or bias, right? And Judaism also teaches the importance of working with others to achieve social justice. And so when we also look at the reform movement in Iraq too, they also have been doing a lot of work around, being able to reflect and relate and then reform. And so if you go to their websites, you can also see those pieces. So all the things that we do have to be grounded in Judaism, has to be grounded around the sacred work that we do. So.
Okay, thank you.
Irene Lefton, would you unmute yourself, please, so we can hear you?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, thank you for the priorities. I appreciate the transparency a lot. I do think we've had at least some priorities that have been very broadly known in the past, but not kind of the whole strategic plan. So I really appreciate that. I've been thinking, as I look through these and as we've been talking about them, I've been thinking about the difference between welcoming and belonging, especially with regard to the first priority and to the last priority on kind of the widening the tent and the virtual side of it. We have so many different kinds of people. Some people, extroverts especially, are really thriving with the Zoom stuff because it gives them a chance in this pandemic to find a place to have faces and talk to people. Introverts, however, might be sitting back and not fully participating. And I know the small groups help with that. But I just want to make sure that we're thinking about those kinds of things as we move into the priorities. And my question is really kind of related to that. How do we bring the outside in, and how do we take ourselves out as we kind of look at, especially the priority of, the internet is our temple, and the whole world is out there. So that's a really big place to go out to. But how do we find the things to bring in that are actually complementary to what it is that we're trying to do?
Do you want to respond to that, Andy, or do you want me to?
Do you want? Yeah, why don't you take a stab at it? And I also have some thoughts too. So.
Well, what I've been thinking about ever since this question came up about spiritual practice, and Irene, you might think, I hope this is an answer to your question in part. The name we've given for priority one, to me, is in effect the frame for the whole thing and for us as a community, which is this notion of being a sanctuary for imperfect practice. And for me, that's a kind of paradigm for looking at what the synagogue is. That this is a place in which we are practicing, and we are in a process of getting better. And we're both notions of practicing, trying and trying again, the notion of imperfection, that we make mistakes and that we can address them and continually improve. And in fact, what we're doing inside the congregation is about our work outside the congregation, and vice versa. So, I'm going to stop there. I want to hear what Andy has to say.
Sure. And I guess perhaps, I be helpful just to make sure I'm understanding what you mean about the outside too, because I think, just practically speaking, one of the things that we think about when we're talking about priority 3 is, how do we continue to really engage all the entire congregation, all of you, and also be able to engage folks on the outside as well. And so I don't know if that's also perhaps what you're referring to, Irene, when you're talking about the outside in the
Yeah,
inside?
that's part of it. I mean, for me, I'm always active in a lot of different things, a lot of different, I've got a lot of silos and different things in my life, and many of them related to Judaism, not all of them related to Judaism, but I interact with a lot of people in the broader unaffiliated Jewish community in the Bay Area in particular, that's part of what I'm thinking about when I think about the difference between welcoming and belonging. And that definitely goes to what I think you're mentioning, Andy. But the other part to it is, I know we now also have all kinds of people from all over the world who have access, at least to our public, to meet us publicly. And that's a different thing. So there's really two parts to that. And if you think about those outside in and inside out and how we manage that, and then you also think about this difference between belonging and welcoming, and it's a good thing to be able to just join and in a big group lurk and watch and learn. But that's not us being proactive and welcoming people. That's people watching us and making their own decisions. So we have to kind of figure out, how do we bridge that, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Irene, you've sort of described the core effort or the core ideas around that third priority. Like, all of a sudden we are encountering a whole new way of interacting both internally and externally. And now we have to figure out what's the path forward through that. I also want to stress, and I think part of the answer to your question too is about our past. Just as an example drawn right from our priorities, this congregation has been involved and continues to be involved in racial justice work in a number of ways. It's not as if this is day one of racial justice work in this congregation. So part of what we're trying to do is harness our knowledge and our experiences to meet a moment, but also to recognize that everything we're describing is continuous with our past. There's no rupture here. We also have an extraordinary opportunity to demonstrate who we are because of the reach we potentially have. So that's also a piece of this puzzle. But Irene, like your question's right at what we're trying to learn and figure out as a virtual community. I don't have the answers to it yet.
That's fine. That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have about 5 more minutes and we still have a few questions. So I want to jump on to Alan Warshaw. Would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Thank you very much. I had to leave for 5 or 7 minutes, so if this topic was covered, I can handle it offline, but it's about Israel. Okay, so I'm part of URJ, Israel Leadership Network, of which 80 people are trying to understand how we can engage Reform congregations more with Israel. And those of us involved in the World Zionist elections, we learned there's a lot to learn. And so I noticed in our mission statement, which I shared with Andy a few days ago, that we don't mention Israel, as do not many congregations, in all fairness, but a few do. So my question in the bigger picture of strategy is to have your comments about engaging and having Israel more inclusive of our strategy in all kinds of ways, I guess I would say.
So I'll quickly respond to that. Alan, I want to stress one thing, that this is year one. And so, or I should put it differently. These are 1-year priorities I guess the one disjuncture from the past, I just talked about the continuity with the past. I think one major disjuncture from the past in this congregation is me. So I'm new. And so part of this for me in this year is to get my mind around us and to figure things out. And so I think you're asking the right question and have a lot I could say in response to it. But I think my response to it is in some ways is a year 2 answer and beyond. So to also stress, again, what I said before, we aren't mentioning everything we're doing in this year in these 3 priorities. So if you don't see something that's of great importance to you, don't conceive of it as having dropped off the radar.
No, I did.
I know
I
you
didn't
don't.
feel-
I know. I'm using your comment to say that more generally, because that's also something we've gathered in this process.
Yeah, there may be a good reason not to have that kind of theme
Right.
in the top line of a strategy. So I'm not suggesting it's a mistake. I'm just voicing my interest in this area. That's
For
all.
sure.
Plus, I get a shot at you on the second when we have the Israel small group thing anyway.
Good. You can do that then. I look
Thank
forward to that.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great. So Steve Ruvolo, you're next in line, and
I'll make it quick.
okay.
So my question is in item 1 about we becoming more welcoming community, recognizing multiracial, multi-faith, et cetera, within our community. And I'm assuming outside the community, we're talking about how we could be better citizens of our community, better citizens of the world, to also exercise that same good judgment in the outside world. And am I getting that right? What I would include in type 1 goal?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if so in the email, we actually had 3 goals within that first priority, and 2 of them are related to ones that are within our own community, and 1 is really an external goal.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to squeeze one more in, and I'm just going to call on Hal Luft, who hasn't had a chance to ask yet. If you could unmute yourself, please, Hal.
Exactly, Susie.
Hi, it's actually me.
Oh, hi.
And you know, it's not a question, it's more of a comment. And I think that, I mean, I really like the goals, and I really like that they're there. And as someone who's been a member for a long time, but really only in the last couple of years really participated, I'm struck by sort of the process of becoming, feeling welcome, and how it takes different steps and different stages, and how surprised I am by the fact that we now really observe Shabbat, not as a result of a sermon or a direction, but having had a chance to experience it a little bit. And so in terms of the spiritual practice, creating the space for people to find the way rather than sort of a roadmap that people need to follow, and trusting the sort of the integrity of what Beth Ham is, I think will go a long way.
Great. Thank you so much. I think it's good advice for sure.
Yeah. And that really resonates with me because of what I've heard Rabbi Morrison talk about in terms of all of us really owning this congregation. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, as you know, I'm sure we're getting close to wrapping up.
Well, yeah, I think I like to actually sort of let Susie's comment effectively be our wrap up. The notion that I want to return to this concept of a sanctuary for imperfect practice. We're all learning together. We are all learning about what it is to both create and recreate and grow this place, this congregation that we all hold very dear. How do we do that in this moment and in this period? And we're also all learning too about how to continue our own discoveries of who we are as humans. And so I think just in closing, first, a word of thank you to you all for taking time to be together. I hope everyone's staying safe, staying indoors if need be. But also to say, we really invite your participation in this process. And we want to hear from you. We want, and we all have to kind of make these big efforts because we won't see each other as we might normally, to reach out to one another and to express ourselves and to say hello. So this is for us like the first hour of a long process and conversation with you. And so please reach out to me or to Rachel or to Andy with anything, any follow-ups you have from this conversation, and also as we go through this coming year. Andy, you want to close us out?
No, I think that's actually a great close.
Great.
So I just want to thank everyone for tonight. And again, yes, we really want to hear from you, especially during this time where it's so hard for us to connect in this way. And so, so we really want to be able to hear from you. If you have any additional comments, questions, thoughts, please reach out to us, and we'd love to engage in a conversation.
Great. Take care, everybody.
All right. Take
Bye-bye.
care, everyone.
Good night,
Talk soon.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.